Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. This panel is a panel on zines and ZineQuest. I'll briefly reiterate the pitch we had for this panel so you know if you're in the right spot and what we're going to be talking about. The pitch is, what is ZineQuest? What is a zine? Is turning my game into a zine and kickstarting it during ZineQuest really something I can do? Join some experienced zine designers to discuss the ins and outs of Kickstarter's ZineQuest initiative and the short and sweet games they've created as part of it. So uh, let's start by introducing ourselves. Tony, do you want to lead us off? Just tell us a little about yourself and where people can find your work online.
I absolutely can. Hi, my name's Tony Vasinda. I'm Chief Alchemist at Plus One EXP, which is a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. So we make games, we make beard balms and skincare products inspired by tabletop tropes, and we also review other people's games and do actual plays of other people's games. Yeah, Beards and Beyond is the overall synthesis fusion of a lot of the stuff that we do. But you can find us at Plus One EXP across almost all social media platforms, and a great place to hit us up if you're a designer who's thinking about running a game. Would love to have you reach out. We'd love to play your game on stream or help figure out how we can help you promote it. Or if you ever want to check out one of our games, you can go to plus1exp.com.
Fantastic. Adriel, will you tell us about yourself next?
Yeah, hi, I am Adriel Wilson. I am 1/4 of ninth level games, and during the day, I also am the indie publisher representative at Drive-Thru RPG, and for ninth level, I do a bajillion different things, as we all do, some design, some editing, and I'm just super excited to talk about zines because zines are something that personally I care deeply about, and ninth level as a whole, we're super into them. Hey, Alexi, who are you and where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm Alexi Sargeant. You can follow all of my gaming endeavors online at Cloven Pine Games. During the day, I'm a freelance editor and dad, but my gaming brand has helped me to put out a couple of games of my design. You can follow me on Twitter at Cloven Pine Games. Check out games I have available on itch.io at Cloven Pine Games, or on Drive-Thru RPG, where the game I first kickstarted it through ZineQuest is available for download. And I also have a monthly gaming newsletter on Substack called Murmurs from the Cloven Pine. So definitely check that out if you want to, kind of dive deep with me into the games I've run and played each month and some of my design thoughts about games. Wonderful. Good to have everybody here. I think this is going to be a fun discussion. So let me quickly talk a little about some of the basics, just so we're all on the same page. What is a zine? What is ZineQuest? Let's get some sort of, stabs at definitions out there. So zines, classically, and I pulled this right off of Wikipedia, are small circulation, self-published works of art or appropriated texts and images, usually reproduced via a copy machine. But for us in the RPG world, many things are referred to as zines that are not literally photocopied fanzines, where that term came from, right? But they're understood in some way to participate in the ethos of zine culture, right? By being the product of a single creator or a small team, by having something of a do-it-yourself feel, and by very emphatically not being a glossy hardcover with full color painted illustrations, right? Because there's one thing people picture perhaps immediately when they think about what a RPG in print looks like, and zines are in some way the rebuttal to that, saying an RPG can actually look a lot different, be a little more economical to produce, right? It doesn't all have to be exactly like these prestige coffee table books. Nothing against those, but not everybody's going to be able to create an RPG in that form. And so the fact that there's a whole culture of zine making creates a space for RPGs to be made that really wouldn't fit in that form factor. ZineQuest is a Kickstarter initiative to encourage RPG makers to put out games and supplements in zine form. Kickstarter describes ZineQuest like this. Our annual ZineQuest prompt bestows creators with this valiant mission: Bring your RPG to life with maps, adventures, monsters, comics, articles, and interviews. To participate, launch a 2-week project for a single color, unbound, folded, stapled, or saddle stitched RPG zine on A5 or smaller paper. So there's some form factor stuff, specified right there that keeps the zine within something like zine constraints, right? For the past couple years, ZineQuest has run in February, and essentially ZineQuest provides a fun label and the encouragement of strength in numbers for game makers to put a project out there that can be a bit shorter, a bit scrappier, a bit more experimental. It's a great place to cut your teeth on the first RPG Kickstarter. I did that. Or to crowdfund for a game that's a bit more offbeat. Anything I missed out on that there? Anything else people want to add about just like what's a zine and what's ZineQuest?
I think you got it.
Good.
Let's talk about what we've done at ZineQuest then. Tony, tell us a little about how you've participated in ZineQuest in the past.
So Alexi was getting ready to run their ZineQuest project, Great Soul Train Robbery. I had played the game, but we were doing a couple other things, and I had a game called Beards and Beyond that I had done a couple years before that, and had always meant to do something more with it. It was a little 4-page RPG. I kind of just put out and said, "This is free. If you give me your email address, I'll send you a copy of it." And just pumped some money into that on Facebook ads. And had about 1,200 people download it in the first couple of weeks, and then had a few hundred more over the next couple of months. And it just sat for about a year and a half. We got feedback on it, and I really loved what was happening with ZineQuest. Really loved the idea of it, and I would not recommend this for almost anyone. So I think like the day ZineQuest launched, I was like, this is a whole lot of fun. I'm gonna run a ZineQuest project at the end of the month. And so we ran Beards and Beyond. And we funded really well, almost 10 times what our core funding goal, which is $500. And we're able to put together a really great project and project page and kind of dive into that. A lot of my stuff is very niche, so it's very much either for you or not for you. Which is one of the things I love about Zine games, but it's a game about bearded individuals from any background traveling the multiverse, fighting the existential forces of evil. And then this last ZineQuest, we did Repugnant RPG with the folks over at Terrible Games, John DeCampos, which is the world's most disgusting, I would say, earnest and non-dehumanizing RPG. It's very much a Garbage Pail Kids style of art and humor, but the world is kind of slowly falling apart, and you're picking your way across a place called the Crust, which is about 3 miles of trash just sitting on top of the surface of the world at this point in the future, and you're all these weird, mutated, gross creatures. It's very middle school humor. If that sounds like your jam, it's a very cool project to check out. But additionally, one of the other things I did this last ZineQuest was zine questing. So over the course of the month of ZineQuest, almost daily, 23 days out of the 29 days or 8 days of the month, I did daily streams covering 10 to 15 of the zines that were live. So I talked about or reviewed or covered about 200 something of the 400 RPGs that were live. About 2/3 of the RPGs I talked about in some way, shape, or form, plus did a lot of review videos, actual plays, and other stuff in the middle of that. Also, so it was a really fun time just highlighting other people's shows and seeing who would show up for that. So a lot of coverage of ZineQuest this year also.
Tony, I think you doing that was just such a huge boon to the zine makers community, right? I know, I'm totally serious.
Yeah, people said it's great that we have our own daily TV show now a couple of times for ZineQuest. So
it created a sense of community. It it helped promote projects, but it also just meant that it wasn't everyone kind of toiling separately on their different zine endeavors. There was a sense that we could tune in and see what was happening and get a sense of the whole shape of how this Kickstarter season was working out for everybody.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot to do. It's a great it's a great way to kind of share what we were doing, but also just a lot of other really small new projects that we were really excited about. talk about things, ask questions, hear what the community was thinking about different pieces. And so yeah, it was really crazy that at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, I mean, everybody was stuck at home, but that, you know, somewhere between 15 and 30 people would tune in, and we'd all talk about zines together for the afternoon.
That's wonderful. All right, Adriel, tell us a little about your ZineQuest endeavors.
Oh boy. Okay. So, ninth level I participated in ZineQuest pretty much since the first one because as people, we love zines, and Chris likes to reminisce about his like 3 white book D&D zines, like from the way back times. And so what we've done is we did a reprint of one of the original Kobolds Ate My Baby zines, because that game actually started out as, you know, Xerox on a copy machine, printed out at work, bound at the kitchen table kind of a zine. And as ZineQuest has grown, and as we've sort of seen what the opportunities there are, we've expanded our sort of like, we were like, okay, a zine has to be X, Y, and Z. And we've sort of expanded our definition a little bit. And we've really dove deep into the format because it's a way for us to get RPGs that we want to have in the world, but maybe don't fit our production schedule for the year. Or they're ones that we've been noodling with for a while, and we're just like, hey, let's get this out into the world. Let's get people playing it. Let's make a zine. So we did the Kobold zine, and in 2020 ZineQuest, it sort of has all blended together as the pandemic goes on. For 2020 ZineQuest, I decided that I wanted to try doing a zine myself from start to finish. So I had a little 200-word RPG that I expanded on, and I planned my project so that I would have exactly enough money, if I funded and did a little more, to pay for the process. I wasn't looking to go any further than that, because what I really wanted to know was, like, can I take a game from my 200-word idea to a full zine by myself? I hired an artist. I, bought a printer. I bought one of those little long staplers so that I could staple them together myself. And like, it was such a cool project and way to really like get it. Like, you can learn how to do a thing, and you can sort of be a part of doing a thing. But when you take that thing and do it from start to finish, I think you learn so much about your own creative process and the kinds of things you want to make. So that was Monster Mix in 2020. And then for 2021, ninth level, we did a lot of zine quests. I don't know why we thought.
ZineQuest.
Yeah, we did all told 4, 5. So we did Savage Sisters, which is a game I had included in 2020's Level 1, the Free RPG Day anthology, and expanded on Savage Sisters. Yay, thank you. I worked with a writer that we really like, Graham Gentz, and Chris did the art, Chris of ninth level, and we just sort of all made Savage bigger. And then under our ninth level account, we did Rebel Scum, which is essentially like Star Wars if it was all about the Nazi punching and your action figures. We did the Very Good Dogs of Chernobyl, which is about Cthulhian horrors being fought off by dogs who live in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And then we did a xenography. And what we wanted from the xenography, we were like, 1, ZineQuest is the coolest thing. We love it. We want a guide to what games were in ZineQuest 1, ZineQuest 2, ZineQuest 3. I don't know if we'll do one for 4. I kind of hope we do, because I know for myself, I'm so excited to have the xenography and be able to check off which zines I have and like which ones I have digitally and which ones I have physically. But anyway, that's sort of my roundabout history with ZineQuest.
Yeah, fantastic. I think you kind of touch on something really interesting, which is the way that kind of ZineQuest is this interesting like middle scale between something that's like a 200 word RPG or a anthology RPG, right, and something that's like a like bigger tier RPG Kickstarter, right? Like even if it's for a soft cover book, ZineQuest kind of provides a level between those. So if you've got a game you want to expand from that smaller level, it could end up being expanded into a ZineQuest project. That's one of the ones I did. I'll mention in a moment. But it also feels like sometimes zines are kind of first drafts or beta drafts of something that the designer is thinking about expanding into something even bigger later. One of my favorite zines from the first ZineQuest is Girl Underground, and I know the designers have talked about considering expanding that into something even bigger. But it's a really cool game as is, where you are collectively playing the girl that has fallen into this fantasy world, very much in the manner of an Alice in Wonderland or a Wizard of Oz. Cool. Let me talk a little about what I've done with ZineQuest. For ZineQuest 2, which was the first one I participated in, that was February 2020. I kickstarted The Great Soul Train Robbery, which is a game about desperados robbing the train to hell using the sweetened by honey heist system. So I took the basic mechanics from Grant Howitt's wonderful honey heist, but instead of criminal bears, you are desperados, and your two stats are lover and sinner. So tonally, it's different. It's this allegorical story where you get a sort of Weird West flavor, but it's all about the like possibilities of salvation or redemption during this hellish train heist. The Great Soul Train Robbery. And then in ZineQuest 3, which was February 2022, I kickstarted Back Again from the Broken Land, which I worked on with my wife, who's a wonderful designer in her own right, Leah Sargeant. And Back Again from the Broken Land is a game about small adventurers sharing stories during the long walk home from an epic war. And that uses the Powered by the Apocalypse system. And it has a lot of inspiration from Tolkien, right? But we're trying to capture some of the more kind of melancholic or meditative stretches of Tolkien's work. Obviously, he's had such an influence on all of the fantasy genre, including fantasy gaming, but we thought there were pieces of The Lord of the Rings that weren't easy to play in a game. And we're like, what if we made a game just for that, right? Just for you are small people and you've stopped to share a meal and reflect on the horrors and wonders you've witnessed, and whether you'll be able to reintegrate into your tiny little town at the edge of nowhere at all. I was pulling off of my shelf a bunch of zines here, and so I think I want to hold them up briefly, just because I think it's cool to see the range of what zines can be, right? Like I've got Fruit Law, which is this tiny little hand-folded zine created by Eli Seitz. It is a game you play while eating a pomegranate. And it's about a people who have a law that they are trying to interpret, and it's this little thing, but it folds out like like so, right? Like it can fold up into a tiny booklet or fold out into different things. And kind of, I feel like this is the most classic sort of idea of what the zine looks like. This is Palanquin, a cool storytelling game from Jason Peet. And you'll see it's got a staple binding, black and white art, and it's 32 pages here, and it creates kind of a one-shot story. You can tell about the bearers of the palanquin bringing the heir away from a palace coup. And then I've got a handful of zines that like kind of went like one step glossier, going for a title and an author on it. And I'll say I did this for Great Soul Train Robbery partially so that I could just have on myself a game with my hand spine, because I felt like that was an important milestone. But it's not that it couldn't have been a larger staple, but you know it'll be zine since it's a larger zine. It can have that perfect binding, perhaps. Um, cool. So
can I
do
jump
we
in here
have
real
some?
quick?
Yeah.
I think you've hit on something really interesting, Alexi, in that a zine traditionally it's that one color printing staple saddle stitch bound, but as ZineQuest has grown, designers have sort of expanded on what in the RPG space specifically we're calling a zine, because it kind of feels like we've all been looking for this sort of in between your big, beautiful, multicolored hardcovers and your saddle stitch, like just copier paper zines. And the part of me that is like, rules are important, is like, oh, but is that really a zine? But the other part of me, who is just like a dragon who hoards indie RPGs, is so excited about that expansion of format. And I also backed Fruit of the Law and love it. Like, anytime a zine does something interesting and unique, and Ash Cheshire is a designer who, every time I see their work on Kickstarter, I back it because they do stuff like that for your Zine Quest space, and it's awesome, and I hope that we continue to sort of grow this tree of zines.
Yeah, I think it's always really interesting. Like, when the question "what is a zine" comes up, for me the answer is, I mean, like, I have thoughts, but also I don't really want to argue about it, right? Like,
Right.
I don't, like, I think there's also the added difference between like what is maybe technically a zine, but what does Kickstarter qualify as a zine when the regards to Zine Quest, which are two different things. Those are not necessarily the same thing. And I think it's always worth saying, like, hey, if the goal and the intent is to do this, then let's try to do that. And if you don't want to do that, it's okay. I think
Yeah.
people have come to see Zine Quest as some sort of weird magic bullet on Kickstarter, which I think is causing a lot of crowding in that month of projects that might even do better out of their parts in the year. I think for me, like, one of the things is, if you don't fit into that category, there's nothing that says you can't just run your Kickstarter. I know there's a lot of energy around that, but that also means there's hundreds of other people running projects that are very similar format wise at the same time. And you always have to ask yourself, like, is this the best time for me just because there's some excitement and energy? Or would it be better if I waited a month or 2 months to do my project and just did it the way that I want to do it? Which I think it's just something you weigh out as a creator a lot of the time. But I also don't think it's ever worth getting in a relationship ending argument with other people, or letting it run wild across communities. Like, what precisely is a zine, and does this fit into that format well,
Yeah.
And that one interesting thing was, sure it was Zine Quest 2, the trophy RPG was kickstarting, and that was definitely not a Zine Quest RPG, and it didn't call itself a Zine Quest RPG. It was going to put out, a full game in 3 hardcovers. But they were running at the same time as Zine Quest, and the folks behind the Kickstarter did a very smart thing where they really encouraged indie designers to, create trophy modules or rooted in trophy games, and they put up some money to kind of say, like, we'll give you this money to, like, get some art for your trophy related project if you want to put out a trophy related zine. So that this bigger Kickstarter existed, but also was like supporting zines and zine makers, and like creating some goodwill and some connections there, so that there's not only like more trophy modules out in the world that people created during Zine Quest, there's also a real sense that trophy was a bigger fish, but it wasn't detracting from Zine Quest, by running at the same time.
And
you
that's
know I,
something. Oh, go ahead, Tony.
no, go, you're fine.
That's something I see a lot at drive-through, is designers sort of getting their feet wet using an existing system before they either like move into making their own system or just working with even more systems, that I think that bringing up Trophy Dark is perfect, because ZineQuest offers that space to be like, I'm a designer, but I'm not ready yet to be like, this is my homebrew that I've been working on for years, and I think you're going to love it too. They can use a system that already exists and make something fresh and new that like no one but them can make, and they aren't constrained by needing to come up with their own mechanics and test them, and they can just focus on the world building and the narrative and what they want their players to be doing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so when I read that description from Kickstarter before, you'll notice nothing in it says that your zine has to be a full game, right? Like, a zine can be anything. A zine can be a module. A zine can be, a system agnostic set of tables, right? A zine could like put anything out there that in some way, can enhance the gaming experience or be of interest to gaming people. But there's no requirement that a zine be a like kind of complete little game on its own.
Yeah. One of my favorite projects from this last ZineQuest, Nerves, was, it's not an RPG, it's not a module, it's not anything else. It is a art magazine about games, and it'll have articles, and it hasn't come out yet, but it'll have articles, stuff like that that's being put out by Bats, and it's such a tremendous concept. But it wasn't like, there's not gameable material that's necessarily coming out with it. There's conversations, reflections, other elements that'll help designers and help people be better players and makers, but it's not a thing that you sit down at the table and go, I'm going to play Nerves now, and I think there's an important understanding to say, a lot of times I think we all rush to, this is what everybody else does, or this, like, in order to be active in the RPG space, we need to be a designer, we need to make our own systems, or we need to write modules. And I think the real question we have to start asking is, where do I contribute within this space? How do I contribute within this space? And should I be running, again, my own ZineQuest project? Should I be partnering with other people? How are we coming together to make those things good? Because my favorite projects are actually ones where somebody's picked something very specific or brought together a team of people with very specific skills and said, here's the thing we're going to do that's a unique offering in this space, but we just love this format, and so we want to engage around it.
One of my favorite projects from, I think it was this year, was the Hibernation project that Lucian Khan put together, because one, it has games from designers I really like, but two, I loved that it had a really concrete topical theme, and I knew backing it exactly what I was going to get. I was going to get a bunch of games that were fun to play at home inside my own house.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'll put it out there for folks in the world. I have a baby due in February, so I'm probably not going to be running a Kickstarter a ZineQuest project if there's a ZineQuest 4 that month. But if there's people who are like, I really want to collect some collaborators, I really want someone to contribute a little bit of design to a zine I have in mind, reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at Cloven Pine Games. I'd love to dip a toe in the ZineQuest scene, even if it doesn't make as much sense for me to run a whole campaign this time around. It's very cool when there are zines that have that collaborative element to them.
Alexi, we had put out beforehand, like, letting people ask about it. And I think it's we've touched on it a couple ways, but I think it's a really good question. Is, for a lot of people, writing in the zine length format seems to be hard for them. Like, how do we, like, how do y'all constrain yourselves to that? I mean, there is a technically an upper page limit to how much of a zine can be, only because of the way that binding works, theoretically. But practically, there's not a limit to how many softcover pages you can have in a book, or pages you can have in a softcover book. But how do y'all keep yourselves to that 20 to, let's call it, like 60 page or lower page limit when you're writing a game or when you're creating a zine?
Generous of you, Tony, to let the limit be like just big enough that the Great Soul Train robbery technically comes in under it.
Look, I may oftentimes find myself at the upper end of that range. Our Down We Go, our last project, we had a zine version, which is really a soft cover version, right? It's like 70. It's going to be 70 pages at the end. So I mean, if you can put a staple through the pages, it counts. You know what I'm saying? Like it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, look, concision is one of those like key skills of game design that you only get with practice. I think it's really interesting to think about, a zine as an expansion of a like truly micro project, right? Like something that starts out as a 200 word RPG, and then it's like give this a little more room to breathe as a zine, but like not wildly expand the concept behind where that started. And so that's kind of what's worked out for me is taking games that I wrote as a 2-pager or wrote as just a little piece in a game anthology, and then letting it become as big as it needs to be to feel like there's a little more support without pushing it further than that, hopefully.
So yeah, I'm sort of where you are, Alexi. Like with Monster Mix, I knew that the 200 words were kind of all I needed to make the activity, which is making a playlist and making a character, making a playlist and sharing with each other and having conversations. I knew it didn't need a lot of expansion. So I thought about the activities around that. I expanded the rules. I talked about great ways to make mixes. And then I inhabited the space of some of the monster characters and included some things that would be cool for them. Like for witches, I included instructions on how to make your own athame. And actually what that is taking a butter knife and sharpening it on concrete. So if you're also an anarchist, pick a Monster Mix. But that was one of the things that I sort of struggled with because I wanted to make sure that I felt good about the amount of content that I was giving to my backers. Because I knew the game was there, but like, what else would they want? And then with like 9th level, with Rebel Scum and Good Dogs, those both grew in the process from what we thought they would be size-wise to something larger, and that is a huge danger. And it is really hard to sort of like use your inner very like very principal like editor who's like, no, 50,000 words or less, and I think setting goals or like setting your own limits, like I'm going to make sure this is on 10 single space pages or something, is helpful because you can break those rules, but if you set them, then hopefully your intentions help guide your creative muse.
You start with some constraints and then
Yeah.
fill them in. Speaking of things growing, I need to step off screen for a moment to help out someone who has decided it's not nap time after all. So I should be back in just a minute.
No problem.
Free to keep chatting about zines.
Yeah, I always start any game I'm writing. I always start out with what is the smallest version of this game I can make. Like
Nice.
I think it's always the question we should be asking is what is the most mentally and content wise economic version of this game we can make, not so that we don't have to charge a lot of money for it, but just so that we can make sure we have the core mechanics really clearly laid out, that we can figure out what the skeleton of the system looks like so that we can start building the best version of that game possible and play test the cleanest version of that game possible, then figure out what actually fits within the rest of that space. And I think lots of times people want to jump to the biggest version of their game right away, and then it's hard to start to cut back and pare back. And you also feel the burden to be like, okay, well now I need all the art and the layout and the editing and everything to go with this, as opposed to if you start to build that stuff up slowly. Because I also think the other thing when when you're putting out a smaller version of the game, you're also inviting other people to start creating things around that game. Like I love making games, but the biggest honor for me is when a game I've made or that I've helped develop, when other people are excited to make stuff for that in that space with that system, other things like that, like Trophy and other things. And I think we see a lot of zine weight games that we're seeing people pick up and take that core system and hack it into something else. Or we're seeing people, like say, hey, I loved this. I want this piece with it also. Can I do that? Absolutely. First of all, also, like people make third-party license. I make third-party license. I make them so that you have permission and don't have to ask.
Yes.
You can just actually just
Yes.
make things for games whenever you want to. Like you don't have to ask anyone. No one has to give you permission. Just go do it. It's fun.
So I want to jump in here because as the indie publisher rep at Drive-Thru, very infrequently I will run into a product where someone has not checked the license. And it's really, really important to do that step. Like you said, Tony, so many systems are open for your own creations. Our ninth level games polymorph system has an open license that you can use, and we've got like specific logos you can put on your books, all of that. And so many RPGs do that. A quick Google will get you to what those licenses are, and there's so much space for you to take that existing stuff and use it. I just always like to say, like, please just check the license, because you never know when there's going to be someone who's like, hey, you can use my entire system except for this mechanic I call Splat. That's only for when you're in Paintland, my, 3,000 word RPG or something like that. But like, check your licenses.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, the other big thing is like, like I'm always a big fan of creators have to be clear about what you can and can't use. But if there's a mechanic you like from a game, like start fiddling around with it, start making something with it, like, start building on it, because you may end up in this place where it's like, oh, I want to do a licensed version of this. You also may end up with something that is a very different mechanic or a very different game that is not connected to that. If we watch the evolution just of like PBTA over the course of the last, decade, it's been crazy to see all the different things that you do. If you sit down with the average person who hasn't looked at any of them, like looked at all those things, they'd be like, these are very different games. They don't, like Forged in the Dark versus PBTA versus a lot of the other ones have some common elements, but they don't feel like the same game, even though they're part of the same developmental tree. So yeah, I mean, like I'm always a big fan of like, don't like check your licenses, but just go start building something and see where you end up, is a huge thing for all of that too. So but I also, like I said, mazes, like I'm a big fan of mazes from ninth level because it started as a ZineQuest project with a series of zines, and then
oh my gosh, I forgot to mention that. Thank you.
No, it's fine. It just launched. They just bundled them all with some additional content and a kind of a reformed version into this big book. And so zines can be an entree into how you're making your big book also. Another one that does that tremendously well is Through Old Tan's Door. The third one came out this last ZineQuest. It was the first time Ben had run a Kickstarter. But Ben has like probably, I want to say, this is a totally me remembering number, like through Old Tan's Door 14, like loosely sketched out, because it's their home play game. Like it's the setting that they run their games in. And so he's releasing them kind of episodically as his players have fully explored those spaces, but he can go forever, and he may eventually bundle them up and this is the Through Old Tan's Door omnibus with everything in it, or it may just all live in zine state forever. But it's a good way to iteratively release what you're doing, and even look at what Mothership is doing right now. Not a ZineQuest
oh my
project,
gosh, yeah,
but a game that was put out in zine format early on, and essentially was the 0 edition of the game. It was what they originally kind of set down, play tested through, came out with, hadn't done all the extensive work on, and now, years after releasing the first one, they're releasing first edition of Mothership. That's still just a collection of zines. They didn't change it to a big book. They didn't do anything else. It's the 3-book format, but it's all still in zine format. And I'm super excited to see what they're doing with that.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up mazes, not only because I completely forgot about it, Tony, but like for that point exactly. When we did mazes initially, Chris was like, I just gotta get this fantasy heartbreaker out of my brain. I just need to make this game, and we'll do it for ZineQuest, so it'll be fine, and it doesn't matter, how many people are into it or what. And then it did really well. And then we got excited about that. And Chris, of course, was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more in this world that I want to share. So we then did the Mazes seasonal zines, which were sort of a yearly subscription of additional content, and included more classes, more edges, more monsters, more adventures. And then now, as you said, this past year we ran a Kickstarter to do the big hardcover with, the metallic printing on it and all that good stuff. But like, that is so 100% true. Like, ZineQuest can help you figure out, is this a game that has legs? Is this a world that has legs? And do I, as the designer, want to spend more time there? And then as backers, do we, the players, also want to spend more time there?
I am back. I'm a little more backlit now because I've had to relocate to a place where I can supervise. But sounds like there was some good conversation going on about what ZineQuest projects can be the seeds of, how they can expand into something larger.
We went all the way down on how do you keep it small, and then went back up to how do you take your small thing and make it big.
Cool. So should we start taking some questions, or yeah? So what do we have from the viewing public on the Twitch chat?
There's lots of good conversation, but one recently by Loot the Body Band asking about ZineQuest project are not system or setting. Basically, thinking about making something with art, music component, but you'd love to see if anyone has released something like that and how they did it.
Cool. Yeah. A ZineQuest project that's not a system or a setting. So one of the kind of more sort of out there projects. Absolutely. Tony, anything you want to highlight on that front?
Yeah, so I want to talk about, if you haven't checked out Loot the Body Band, go check out Loot the Body Band. You can find them over on Bandcamp. They're absolutely phenomenal. We got to collaborate with them on our last project, Down We Go. And they are specifically asking about the art and music component. Within the concept of ZineQuest, I think it's really interesting because of some of the format considerations. However, I love the idea of, like, okay, what are you listening to while you're doing this? Or even art kits. Like Feral Indie Studios, not as part of ZineQuest, puts out art packs on a fairly regular basis that are absolutely phenomenal. Charlie's a really, really phenomenal artist, but they take stuff that is kind of B art from things that they were working on, or he'll just sit down and do some packs every once in a while of different pieces and pop those up. I love stuff like that. Things that are visuals that you can put in, like a zine that was just a set of striking physical places with the music that plays in the background while you're in those spaces, I think could make a really great system neutral, almost not even necessarily game centric RPG space where you can show people here's where you are, and then just putting in music with a little bit of ambience in the background could be a very, very cool ZineQuest project. I think we've seen a lot of zines go the cassette tape / record route also too recently, that people are going to produce a zine, but they're also going to put a small record or a cassette with it, which I'm a huge fan of. It's how we've collaborated with Loot the Body. I don't know that other than adding in cassettes and some music pieces that I've seen anybody do anything like that. But if it was just the concept of here's an art zine with some music that's going to go with it to inspire your tabletop settings, it'd be something that I would be super interested in. Obviously, it's going to depend on quality of art and other stuff like that, just like anything else. But I think there's so much that could be done in that space, even with maybe a simple hex map at the very front of that. That's kind of how are these spaces are connected or arranged or something like that. But I don't know that I've seen a specific project that's done that. I don't know if anybody else can think of one off the top of their head. But I think things like that could be really cool.
I realize one interesting project from the latest ZineQuest was McGay Baker's Miscellany of Mending.
Yes.
This was a guide to like real world mending, right? Like each page gives you ways to uh, uh, fix, recycle, otherwise, patch up, objects that might be in your home. It's a sort of uh, zine with a real ethos of not letting things go to waste, not throwing things away, like gaining the skills to fix stuff, and like sort of a slight like fantasy theming to it, where there's sort of a sense that this is a magic you're doing by mending things, but it's all like real world stuff that can benefit you to learn. So this was a really interesting project of kind of to what extent can real world skills be like put forward in a game flavored way, but um, there's an entirely so there's a both like a totally practical side to it and a extremely whimsical feel to it, and I think that's very cool as a evolution of what a zine in this space could be.
So one thing that I haven't seen a lot of and that I do want more of in ZineQuest and in this space is that kind of thing that she was doing, which is I'm inhabiting the in-world character space and I am providing for you resources that aren't necessarily like this is your game, this is how to play, but more how to inhabit your like sort of fictive RPG reality. And like I love that stuff. That's part of why I did it with Monster Mix, and I would love to see more zines that do that, or like fanzines that take place in your world. Like, are you playing a modern RPG where all your characters are in a punk band? I want to see fanzines from the fans of that punk band, or like guides to how to make those fanzines. And one group of creators I want to point out is Density Media. Their zines always have this really cool sort of like real world aspect. I don't know how to explain it. It's not like you have to like go out into the real world and do a task, although you can, but they sort of bring into your game space your real world stuff. And their zines are always like so freaking cool looking. And that's another space where I think there could be more interesting content. But yeah, when Density Media does ZineQuest, highly recommend backing them. As creators of zines yourselves, they often have a trading level, and I still owe them a copy of Savage Sisters for the zine I got from this year's ZineQuest, so this is a good reminder to mail it to them.
I love that zine trading level. That really gets at the like do it yourself swap meet roots of zines as a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Any more questions we want to field? Anything else come up in the chat?
It wasn't a question, but Richard had a really good observation about some of the shifts in ZineQuest this time around, wondering if that part of the shift to the more produced zines was fear of us having access to cheap or free copy machine or office printer usage, while we had easy access to big printers like Mixum, who had an overstock on satin paper and discounted using it, which I think the market conditions around how zines get made definitely impact the way that we express, or not market conditions, the lived conditions around how zines are able to be made definitely impacts the format that they oftentimes take as an essential part.
Yeah.
Really
I mean, another
observation.
irony there is I remember running the numbers and it's like, oh, Mixum will print this in color for the same cost as printing this in black and white. And it's like, well, I'm going to do black and white because, I've got black and white art and, black and white fits the whole like ZineQuest feel. But it's funny because, black and white was initially about lowering costs, but when for the printer, it doesn't matter whether it's black or white or color. It feels like, the black and white nature is an artifact of, a different set of technological constraints.
And one of the things that I think hit ZineQuest hard-ish is Lightning Source Ingram, who are our print partner at Drive-Thru RPG, discontinued the saddle stitch format. So we were suddenly in a position where, like, oh no, we can't, like, provide saddle stitch titles print on demand for our publishers anymore. And that was a real, like, it bummed me out a lot because to me, the saddle stitching is one of the hallmarks of a zine. Now, obviously, it doesn't need to be. Like, obviously, things can be perfect bound and all that good stuff. But I definitely think that had an effect. And I am interested to see what next year will be like based on the ways that shipping and lack of raw materials are affecting tabletop as a whole. And like maybe this year there's going to be a huge influx of digital zines with physical resources that you can acquire at your local CVS, like a cheap ass game used to be.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a lot of format shifts over the course of the next little bit. I did perfect bound in Settle Stitch for Beards and Beyond, and it was my first time ever holding the same zine side by side with two different bindings, and like I actually just like Saddle Stitch better. Like that was my biggest sad of Drive-Thru RPG discontinuous. Like, I like it when they lay flat, and that's a big advantage, and they don't with perfect bound zines for the most part.
But to be clear, we did not discontinue it. We just had to move forward with what Lightning Source told us.
Yeah.
Here's.
Cool. Alexi, do we want to move into kind of our final piece?
I think so. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what each of us would like future ZineQuest participants to have as a takeaway or lesson from our experience doing ZineQuest. Tony, do you want to, or actually, Tony, kick us off. You said you had a kind of
So I want to talk more specifically about marketing. Like I don't anticipate even contributing to a ZineQuest project this time around. I've had a couple people come up to me and ask me. I've been very, very clear, but it'll depend on what part or kind of thing they want me to do, because I'd rather create content that helps market your game than contribute to your game. In all honesty, like it's something I'm more excited about, and that I think has a better support for you than just me being another stretch goal contributor. But either way, I think the big question a lot of people have to ask themselves are, what does it look like to market a zine? Because a lot of people assume, because of some of the numbers in ZineQuest, that it's a great time to launch a project, and it might be. If you're a first-time creator, if your goal is low, and if you're willing to do the legwork to get the word out, because people think you put a project on Kickstarter and that Kickstarter helps market it, and that is to a certain degree true, but you have to bring a fan base and following to the platform that's going to do it. And if you have a $300 goal and your zine is $15 each, it's not actually a hard thing. That means if you know 30 people who will back it, you're set, right? But I think we see a lot of times like 92% success rate for 400 projects and think it's easy to launch a project during ZineQuest. A lot of those scrape by, barely fund, and then they're first-time creators who realize afterwards they needed more money to execute the way they want to. And I've seen this happen a lot. So I think you have to ask yourself, is ZineQuest the best time? Is there another better time to launch your zine-based project? Because there's a lot of people who launch that same time. If you're going to do it, launch the first week or launch the third week or launch right at the very end, because those are the times where things kind of reset since they're 2-week projects. And then consider, how are you going to get the word out about that? If you want to work with us at +1, that's great. But TPK Roleplay and a ton of other people out there love supporting indie RPGs and helping showcase them through actual plays and other stuff like that. So I would say look at what your marketing opportunities are and plan on doing some things to help market your game, or at least have a strategy for being willing to retweet/post about your game every day for 2 weeks, which is emotionally exhausting. So you've got to think about how you're going to cut through the noise anytime you're approaching a crowdfunding project, if you want to make sure you have the money you need to not run into roadblocks a little ways down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Sage advice there, Tony. I'll put forward something. This is a real, like, hopefully encouraging thing. I think people should be not afraid to shoot their shot when it comes to putting a ZineQuest project together and thinking about reaching out for collaborators. If you've got some bite-sized way that someone can contribute to your zine, and there's people you'd be really excited to have do that, I say go for it. With Back Again from the Broken Land, I thought, who would I be most excited to have, do something for this game? So I reached out to Epadiah Ravishal, creator of Dread, the Jenga-based horror RPG, and to Magay Baker, co-creator of Apocalypse World. And I asked them if they were willing to contribute a playbook each to Back Again from the Broken Land, and they both said yes. So I feel, both incredibly lucky and honored that that worked, and like that's a good encouragement that, the RPG scene is full of people who are great, right? People who, are probably willing to at least chat with you and consider working with you if you have something that's a reasonable ask. And I say, don't be intimidated and go for it.
I agree with both of those pieces of advice, like 100%. And what I would add is try not to bite off more than you can chew. 9th level games this year, we did 4 total Zine Quest campaigns, and that was too many. Like, we ended up having this glut of work happening all at the same time because there's a particular timeline with a Kickstarter, right? Like, you run it, you've got this timeline to fulfillment, and if you're doing 4 of the same kind of thing around the same time, you're setting yourself up to have way too much work later down the line. So really think about what you're offering and what you want to do so that you can set yourself up for success in terms of the amount of work that's going to come after. Like this year, my friends RB Trio launched their first Zine Quest, Bad Decisions, and they did an amazing job and it did really well. And when I previewed their Kickstarter page, I was like, guys, I see that you've got a level where you're going to send a postcard to every backer. I think that's super cool. But I want you to really think about, like, how much work will it be to send this postcard? And they went forward with it and it worked great. And like, that felt awesome because I knew that they had taken the time to say, what's going to set us up for the most success? So that now that we have all these backers who are the beginning of your customer base and who you can market your next Zine Quest to, that like, that was a huge success for them, and that the people who supported them also felt like, oh, hey, I got a great zine. I got the postcard they told me I was going to get. I will back more games from these guys.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our time. Why don't we do one last round of reminding people who we are, where they can find our stuff, and just thanking everybody for coming out and joining us for this panel. I can kick us off this time. Once again, you can find me online at Cloven Pine Games on Itch.io, on Twitter, and on Substack. The latest game release is on sale for Halloween, so you can get 50% off on Itch.io if you want to get my supernatural pirate game, story of freebooters raiding the Armada of the Damned. It's called The Devil and the Deep Blue Sea. And it was a stretch goal from my Great Soul Train Robbery Kickstarter. It was unlocking this reskin of that game to be about pirates. So find that at Cloven Pine Games on Itch.io. Thanks everybody for coming. Tony, why don't you go next?
Sure. My name is Tony Vasinda. I'm Chief Alchemist at Plus One. We make games, we make bombs, and we review and do actual plays for other folks' games. Actually, Monday night, Alexi and I are going to be playing Autumn Triduum, his game about nuns fighting the forces of evil. That's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So come hang out with us and learn that game, watch what we do, check out Alexi's awesome games. And we've got a bunch of other stuff coming up next week. We've got a horror panel that we were trying to get in October, but couldn't make it, with Chris Bissett and a number of other horror authors from around the globe. A lot of different community conversations. Would love to have you follow us on social media at +1EXP, on YouTube at youtube.com/+1EXP, or go to +1EXP.com to check out our games. and our bombs and help support us financially. So yeah.
Fantastic. Adriel, take us home.
Hi, I'm Adriel Wilson. You can find me on Twitter at ReindeerB. You can find the majority of my games and the stuff I do with Ninth Level Games at ninthlevel.com. That's the numeral 9th level.com. And if you're interested in my playlisting RPG about being a monster mix, you can find it on Drive-Thru RPG and itch.io under Adriel Lee is my publisher name in both of those places. And just thanks for being here and listening to us talk about zines. And Alexi, Tony, thank you so much for talking about zines. This has been really great, and I hope y'all have a really wonderful rest of your Metatopia.
This has been great. Happy Metatopia to all.
Bye.